What's up guys, Kyle here again, and today we are going to shoot out the Peavey Valveking with the Peavey Valveking. Let's do it! Alright, hope you guys are doing great out there today. If this is your first time here at my channel, my name is Kyle, and what I do is I take awesome high gain amps, overdrives, guitar cabinets, speakers, pickups. I record them with a simple SM57 setup, and I give you guys the unprocessed audio on your end. So if you're into E standard thrash riffs, drop C hardcore riffs, and dudes that are choking on almond dust, you're in the right place. Consider hitting the like button on the way out and subscribing so you don't miss any more of my stuff. Thanks! Alright guys, so today we are comparing the Peavey Valveking Mark I versus the Peavey Valveking Mark II. The Mark II is an updated version of the Mark I that kind of fixes some of the issues and adds a little bit more functionality to it. I did a standalone video on the Mark II and I found that it sounds basically the same, but you don't have to do the goofy mods to the Mark II that you do with the Mark I. If you stick a dummy plug in the second input on the Mark I, as well as put a patch cable in the effects loop, it kind of clears the amp up, it brings it to life a little bit. On the Mark II, you don't have to do that stuff, and in fact, when you do it, it doesn't make any difference, so it's like Peavey kind of fixed that when they re-released it. They also added some functionality, including USB recording out and a speaker DI out that defeats the power section, so you can record with this amp directly into your interface without having to have it hooked up to a cabinet. So nice functionality, but for all intents and purposes, otherwise, in my experiment here, they seem to sound pretty much the same. And honestly, considering the prices that you can purchase these amps at on the used market, I bought this one for about 200 bucks. I bought this one for about 300 bucks. They are well worth the price that you pay for them, especially in the current climate where the prices of every other tube amp just seem to be skyrocketing. So they are not a bad value by any means. They're also not the greatest amp in the world by any means, but we're gonna see if there really is any tonal difference between the two. For that intro clip, I was using my Balaguer Typhon with the Hypernova modern high output pickups. These are ceramic magnet pickups, very modern sounding. That's why I described them as modern already, but I like to repeat myself. Modern. We actually had no outboard boosts on whatsoever. We were using the built-in boost and the built-in gain switches on the amp in order to achieve the tones that we were getting. But of course, we will mess around with some outboard boosts as well at some point in the video. But I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna dial the gain down, I'm gonna kick those switches out on both of these amps, and we're gonna compare the amps starting with all settings at noon and see what differences we can pick up. All right guys, both amps have all of the EQ settings at noon, including the resonance and presence. We are going to remain on the AB side of the texture control on both amps, and I've got the gain at 9 o'clock, so let's hear how they differ. All right, first impressions. The Mark II is a little bit rounder in the mids overall, a little less spiky up top, and a little more full in the low end. So yeah, take that and compare it to the original. That's basically how they differ. Let's go ahead and kick some more gain on because we want to get right into the belligerent riffage. Gain is now at 4 out of 10 on both amps, or 11 o'clock. Okay, so again, the Valveking 2 seems to be maybe slightly more muffled on top, a little rounder on the mids overall. The Mark I, when I pushed up the gain, it seemed to fill the amp out quite a bit. So now it actually sounds a little bit fuller than the Mark II. So let's go ahead and kick that gain up all the way to 1 o'clock on each amp. Pretty much all the same things still apply. So let's go ahead and pull that gain back on each amp. I keep getting lost on the controls. Let's kick in the gain switch and see how it sounds with the gain at 11 o'clock and the gain switch in. All right, so the Mark I is very, very trebly. They both are trebly amps, but the Mark I definitely just sounds a little colder overall. So I have rolled the treble back on the Mark I to try and match the Mark II. We're also gonna have to roll the mids up a tad. I'm gonna roll the treble back even further on the Mark I. Mark II overall just has more mids in general. It seems like it's got a little bit more of an upper mid voicing to it. It's very subtle, but it is there in comparison to the Valveking Mark I. Let's go ahead and push that gain up to noon on both. Overall, the Mark II sounds punchier, a little tighter. It sounds better. It sounds better to my ears than the Mark I. The Mark I is kind of scratchy. It's almost like the tubes are running really cold or something. Just, it gives that impression. Whereas the Mark II sounds a little fuller, a little fatter, maybe not quite as clear, but it just sounds more pleasant to my ears. Yeah, it definitely just seems a little tighter, a little less abrasive, a little bit more smooth in the saturation. Yeah, the Mark I is just a really bright amp overall. It's very, very bright. I'm gonna go ahead and kick that gain out on both of these, and we're gonna hit it with an external overdrive and see how it reacts to that. I'm getting some interference here, sorry. So let's go ahead and kick on the Deadwell Duality DX and see how the amp sounds when being pushed by an external overdrive. I don't know, every time I go back and forth, it seems a little different either way. Like it seems like one seems brighter and then I adjust it a little bit and then the other one seems brighter. So it really just seems like you can dial them in to be almost exactly the same. So it really doesn't seem like there's any major voicing changes in the amp. Let's go ahead and dial up the presence and the resonance a little bit. Let's pull the treble back on both amps just a tad and see what difference that makes. All right, both amps have pretty much the same settings, so let's see how that sounds. Once I dialed the treble back up on the Mark II, it seems to have kind of evened them out quite a bit. Still a little bit more like low mid or mid roundness in the Mark II, but it's super subtle. It really is. They basically sound the same for all intents and purposes. Maybe a tad more upper mid grind in the Mark II. It's really kind of crazy how similar they are. I mean, I guess it's not that crazy because they're the same amp but different iterations. So I don't know what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and go down to drop C and play a couple hardcore riffs. All right, so we're in drop C. I am going to dial the gain up on both of these amps to just over noon. Man, it's kind of tough to figure out which one I like better. Again, this one just has a little bit more low-mid grunt. This one has kind of more of the upper-mid vintage Peavey cocked wah thing going on. They both sound pretty cool. Let's see if we scoop the mids out a little bit on both amps, how much of a difference that makes. All right, so on the low palm mutes, the Mark II definitely has a bit more of a punch to it. It sounds a little woofier, like it's almost like too much low end going on. The Valveking seems more focused, I guess, but the punch definitely isn't quite there in the same manner. It doesn't have quite the same low end kick. Let's bump up the resonance and the low end a little bit. I'm gonna get those mids back up on both amps. I'm gonna turn off the dead weld, and I'm going to kick on the onboard gain boost again. And let's see how that sounds. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for me today on the Peavey Valveking 100 Mark I versus Mark II shootout. In my personal assessment, I feel that both amps are very, very similar. The differences that we're hearing could be down to the bias or the rating of the power tubes. For all I know, the Mark I sounds a little bit colder, a little bit brighter on top. The Mark II sounds a little bit fuller, especially in the low mids, and warmer overall. It's got more of a low end punch and push, whereas the Mark I is a little bit more focused and has a little bit more upper mid thing going on. But I mean, the differences are so subtle, there really would be not much of a reason to choose between Mark I or Mark II, unless you wanted the extra built-in features of the Mark II, which include the USB recording and the microphone simulated DI out with the power amp defeat switch. That was really hard to say all at once. But anyways, yeah, not a huge difference between the two. So if you're deciding between this one for 200 and this one for 300 bucks and you don't need the extra features, go ahead and get the Mark I because it basically sounds exactly the same. Overall, I still think that these are great budget amps, and if you need a full tube amp and you are on a very tight budget, this amp with the right EQ in the loop and a boost out front, you could get great tones out of all day long. So you know, either one would do just fine for that purpose, especially if you're finding them for 350 bucks or less. I would say absolutely go for it. But yeah, that is my assessment. I hope that you guys found it helpful. If you did like the video, if you found it helpful, do me a huge favor and hit that like button on the way out, as it greatly helps this channel grow. Consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my upcoming amp shootouts and content. And if you want to support what I do here, go down in the description of the video, click on my Sweetwater affiliate link, and anything you buy from Sweetwater, it's no charge to you and I get a little kickback. It greatly helps this channel move forward, and it helps me afford more gear to shoot out for you guys. Also down in the description of the video is the Belligerent Amateur community. Consider joining my Facebook group or Discord server, coming and hanging out and talking about gear all day long. And also leave the comments down below of what you thought of these two amps. Which one did you prefer? If you own either of these two, what are your experiences with them? Let me know down in the comments and I'll meet you down there to chat about it, guys. Thanks again so much for watching. Kyle here, and we'll see you next time.